Most of us have taken an aspirin if we have a headache, and of course, recent evidence has shown taking a low dose of aspirin is known to reduce the risk for heart disease. Now, scientists say it may also reduce the risk for pancreatic cancer. Patients who had been taking aspirin for 1 to 3 years actually lowered the risk for pancreatic cancer by 48%. That's right, 48%. To talk more about this study is Newsmax Deputy Health Editor Nick Tate. Nick, it's good to have you with us as always.
Good to be with you, Lynn.
When I hear that there is a drug out there as simple as aspirin that could help reduce fatalities with pancreatic cancer, I'm stunned. Why is it that aspirin could have this impact?
Well, it's really very exciting, particularly for pancreatic cancer, which is really one of the bad ones. You know, pancreatic cancer strikes without warning, and for most people, by the time they realize they have it, it's too late to do anything about it. 8 in 10 people who are diagnosed usually die within the first year, and 94% die within 5 years. So having a cancer prevention method as simple and as cheap as aspirin really is very good news for those folks. Now, you know, aspirin isn't for everyone. It does cause some problems, gastric distress, some bleeding for some folks, and if you're taking a blood thinner, it can cause more harm than good. But for those people who are at risk of pancreatic cancer, who to this point have really not had much in the way of prevention opportunities and options, this is really a terrific one.
How do we know if, in fact, we're at risk for pancreatic cancer?
Well, it's a funny thing. There really are not a lot of early warning signs. And that, as I suggested, I mean, pancreatic cancer is, we might describe it as kind of one of the ninjas of the cancer world, in that it really does strike often without any warning signs in folks who might otherwise be healthy. Usually a family history, there is some genetic component that is involved, and sometimes symptoms that are kind of unpredictable, like depression, may signal that there's something going on with your pancreas. But there really isn't a lot of good evidence to suggest that if you take certain steps, there are things that can prevent it, and if you're very vigilant, that you should watch for these signs. That's why a prevention method like aspirin could be a real boon to folks who are potentially at risk.
Has it actually been used in individuals who have already been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer?
In this case, what the Yale researchers did is they looked at folks who did not have pancreatic cancer, and they gave them aspirin and compared them to folks who didn't get aspirin. And what they found is that the folks that received aspirin did not develop pancreatic cancer. So the evidence suggests that, in fact, it will prevent it from developing in the first place. Now, most of the people who benefited greatly were the ones who were taking a daily low-dose baby aspirin for 10 years or more. But even in people who were only taking it for 3 years, there was a reduction of about 40% in the risk of developing pancreatic cancer.
Typically, when someone does hear that diagnosis, that they do have pancreatic cancer, they are told to prepare for the worst. Do you see this as a development that might actually change those statistics and change them somehow to the positive side?
Well, the more that we learn about the role of inflammation in all kinds of diseases, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, the more we learn that keeping inflammation in the body low is really important to not only preventing disease from developing in the first place, but slowing its progression. And certainly aspirin is one of those things that has that kind of moderating effect. So this may open doors that we can't yet envision to not only prevention strategies, but identifying those people who are at risk, and also in terms of treatment for those who are diagnosed. We just don't know at this point in time.
It sounds like if your doctor gave you the okay, that we should all be taking a small dose of aspirin on a daily basis, because it's proving to ward off a lot of different things that could end up taking our lives.
Well, that in fact is the main point you made is a really good one. If your doctor gives you the okay, because there are of course some downsides for some people, but you know, people have been taking aspirin or forms of aspirin for millennia. The ancient Greeks used to take a form of it, a naturally occurring form of aspirin that was in the bark of willow trees to reduce fever and to treat pain. And now we know through scientific analysis that a chemical compound in that bark is a very close chemical cousin of aspirin. So we know it's well tolerated by a lot of folks, and there are some doctors who believe that if you're over 40 and you're already doing the good things that you should do for your health, eating right, exercising, not smoking, lowering your stress levels, well, maybe you should look at aspirin as the next thing to add to your list to boost your health. But you do need to talk with your doctor first and make sure you're not at risk.
Well, aspirin can still get rid of headaches, but increasing evidence shows it can do so much more. Scientists already say a low dose of aspirin daily lowers the risk of heart disease, and now it may also reduce reduce the risk of pancreatic cancer, which, as you know, is a swift and incurable cancer. To give us more insight into this perhaps life-saving drug is Dr. Nisa Goldberg, a cardiologist and the director of the Joan H. Tisch Center for Women's Health. Dr. Goldberg, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks. It's exciting about the benefits of aspirin.
Would you say that it truly can now be considered a life-saving drug?
Well, we always thought it was a life-saving drug because it prevents heart attacks, and heart attacks are the leading killer of men and women in our country. In fact, the first thing we do when someone is having a heart attack is we have them chew an aspirin, because heart attacks are caused by blood clots, and aspirin stops blood clots in their tracks and saves heart muscle when you come into the hospital.
But that's not the only thing we should do if we think we're having a heart attack.
No.
Popping the aspirin is not where we stop.
You know, you could pop the aspirin with one hand and touch your phone with the other, calling 911.
We just heard Nick Tate give us a report about pancreatic cancer and how aspirin is now being touted as a way to prevent pancreatic cancer as well as heart disease. Would you recommend that every American, if their doctor suggests, take an aspirin every day?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Because the study on pancreatic prevention of pancreatic cancer is interesting, but it's still a relatively small study. We really need to test it out to see if all people benefit from taking that aspirin to lower risk for pancreatic cancer. We've had other studies that have shown that aspirin can also reduce the risk for colon cancer, but we don't routinely give people an aspirin to reduce risk for colon cancer. We do commonly give people aspirin to reduce risk for heart disease.
You said before that heart disease affects men and women differently. How so?
Well, women are more likely to get their first heart attacks about 10 years after menopause. Men get their first heart attacks in their 40s and 50s. And in fact, there have been two separate aspirin studies, one done on a large group of men and another done on a large group of women. And we found some interesting things about those studies. An aspirin a day, a low-dose aspirin a day, does reduce the risk for a first heart attack in men, but not in women until they're at the age of about 65.
And the symptoms, I understand, present themselves differently between the sexes.
Yeah, we're used to men having that Hollywood heart attack with crushing chest pressure, going down their arm, short of breath. And women can have that symptom, but more commonly they have shortness of breath at very low levels of exertion, unexplained fatigue. Sometimes the pain is near their belly, so they mistake it for a stomach ailment.
Are we also the type that put it off and say, you know
Definitely.
what, I don't have time to deal with this right now, so I'll just take an aspirin or I'll lay down for a bit, but we don't necessarily seek medical treatment?
No, or I'll have patients come in to me weeks later and say, I thought I was having a heart attack and I took an aspirin and then looked up the symptoms on the internet. And I said, don't waste the time. If you take the aspirin because you think you're having a heart attack, you have to go to the hospital. Call 911.
We hear about heart attacks probably more frequently than anything else, but heart disease is a #1 killer of women, particularly in this country.
That's right, and although awareness has increased a lot in women, they still don't think it's going to happen to them. So we really have to take steps to prevent heart disease. And in particular, women under 50 are still not taking those steps. So although we're very successful in lowering rates of death due to heart disease in women over 50, we have to start working on the younger women to prevent premature heart attacks.
And what can we tell them? What kind of advice would you give a younger woman so that she does not become a victim of heart disease or a heart attack later in life?
Quit smoking.
Oh.
So many young people are smoking. And if you're active when you're young, keep it up. You may not be able to do the same high-impact activities as you get older, but then again, maybe you can take some aspirin for those knee pains. But you really need to keep active because exercise, taking a moderate paced walk lowers your risk for heart attack and stroke by 50%.
Finally, I have to ask about the disadvantage that might be associated with aspirin for some people who would be watching this.
Well, if you're someone who has stomach problems, it can increase bleeding in the stomach. If you know that you have a high tendency to bleeding and bruising, you really need to talk to your doctor before you do that.
That's the advice that we always try to leave viewers with on this show, is talk to your doctor. We want to start the dialogue, but you have to talk to your doctor.
That's right. You really should start a dialogue with your doctor. That's how you can improve your health.
Well, we certainly appreciate the dialogue that you gave us today. It was nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
Now, has this happened to you recently? A friend suddenly tells you they can't go out to dinner with you because they're on a gluten-free diet and there's nothing on the menu they can eat. Is this a new craze that's sweeping the nation? We're going to find out. And should you be involved in it? Stay with us.